Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the End Zone to End Zone podcast from Synced Up Designs. I'm Dan Twiford, and here we have
Shane Gwaltney.
the two of us are going to have a good chat today about some things for indoor ensembles, but probably for all ensembles too, related to problems that we all face and solutions for those problems. We'll be tackling things from momentum in your season, the differences between experienced and inexperienced performers and how that translates to momentum, facilities, ensemble development, communication. We're going to hit it all today. So strap in. We've got some really good advice coming your way, and I think a lot of topics that every ensemble faces. So Shane, if you want to dive in, I think we wanted to start with something that's more program level as far as biting off and chewing and what those two things interact.
I think we've all been on the receiving end of talking with a client that has a much bigger stomach or much bigger appetite than probably what their stomach can probably handle. And a lot of times that has to do with maybe that's a new staff person and maybe not realize what their limitations are in the winter. Maybe they can only rehearse one day a week. Maybe they can never do Saturdays. Maybe they can't get into the gym at all until mid-March when the basketball team's out. There's a lot of problems out there that a lot of groups go into, but if they're not thinking about how to cater towards their unique situation, then they might not be able to reach the success that they're trying to get to, and they're going to find themselves chasing their tail year after year when they're trying to do more than what the program can really handle.
Yeah.
And we run into that daily almost, and it's really kind of mentoring those instructors, those directors to kind of lead them in a direction so that they can be successful, because that's, if they're successful, we're successful, right? So I don't try to draw any punches when I'm talking to a group about that. I'm not going to try to oversell them on what they can do when they clearly can't, But I think that's the most important thing, is just making sure that we're all successful, right? And just being real with your program. I mean, that's a hard thing to do, especially for a young instructor, because you see them for what you want them to be versus what they are at the moment. And it just takes somebody that's a little more mature to be like, okay, this is where we are now. In 3 years, I think we can be here, but we need to do these first couple baby steps first so that we can taste success at whatever level that is.
So, I think this has to do with managing expectations, like your expectations and the kids' expectations too, and the parents and the whole program, really everyone who's involved, to know here's what the mission is this year and why. And you might make a mistake by not being as aware of where your performers are at. Like, I mean, if you're only coming into the school every other week to teach a couple lessons to a couple kids, maybe you don't really have a feel for the performance level of all the kids who are going to be in your program.
Or the parent support that's expected, or the support from the directors even. Like, you really don't know what that's going to be like. If you're just somebody who does lessons and all of a sudden you're like, hey, let's do an indoor program, and expect more versus, what you...
Doesn't mean don't do it, but that's more communication, more kind of due diligence you need to do and get to know everybody who's going to be involved so you can set the expectations better. I think we'd agree that the most satisfying experience that for everyone involved in an indoor project is to everyone is going to grow. Everyone gets a little bit better at what they're doing. All the kids level up throughout the season, but to a degree where they feel like they rang the bell at the end and they got the successful performance at the end and they want to tell 10 friends to join, right? But if you overextend, if you're going to do music that's too hard, or you only rehearse once a week and you had all these grand plans because you didn't factor all that in, everyone's not going to have that sweet taste in their mouth at the end.
Yeah, you can definitely overplan and not be able to deliver, and that's the worst, because then you're just dealing with an overflowing cup all season, and you don't necessarily know how to manage it, right? So I think managing expectations up front to be like, yeah, hey, the mile in front of us is a full mile, but hey, we're only going to go 500 yards today, and that's it. Or this year, period. And then next year we're going to finish that off and move on. But I mean, I think just being a director and being intimate enough with your group to understand the reality of the situation,
Right. And it's awesome when you see kids who are super fired up about we're making semis this year because they didn't last year. You know what I mean? Like that says something good to me when even the kids know, like, here's my goal and darn it, we're going to work hard and get that goal, right? Whatever is that correct stretch for you guys for this year. Now, what are some ways that maybe you can get your hands on that information? If you're not intimately involved with the program, you're trying to do this, I think being dialed into, the opposite season, if you're only coming in to teach indoor, like you better been around a little bit in the fall to kind of know what's going on. And as far as what the kids can handle, if you are involved in private lessons, that's great because you can kind of see some of that play out. But ideally, you want to be able to get a read on how they're doing in concert band, in, marching band, if we're talking about indoor. And talk to the darn kids about what their school load is like too and what their priorities are, because then you're not going to maybe run into a brick wall where it's like, but I had this expectation for you. And they're like, man, that's not even, and they might not have the language to tell you. You're their coach.
Well, a lot of times kids don't know what they can't handle on the end because they want to do everything, but the parents are going to be the ones that say, no, you can't do that one extra thing because you're already doing X, Y, and Z. You can't do that. But you may not know that as an instructor. You may not know what you're dealing with. And I think a common problem band programs have is we already deal with the top 10 percentile of the school as far as work ethic, commitment level. So we're already dealing with the top tier kid. And when they come to you and they say, hey, I'm already maxed out, I have these other things. I mean, that's probably true. They do have a lot of other things going on because most band kids can handle a lot of other stuff like that because they're just trained to, right? But yeah, I think that's a tough one to kind of manage as you're going through expectations to, and maybe you take a survey for every student, like, hey, what other extracurricular activities are you really in? I think some of the biggest conflicts I've ran across was soccer sometimes because that's in that season. You're going to run clearly basketball, but most of those kids aren't doing drumline too like that. But drama is a big one.
Oh, yeah.
And choir. If you have a really active choir, show choir, or drama department, that could conflict with this because we've all lost students to those type things because they're still performing arts.
Yeah.
So they're still doing something they love. It just may not be in your department.
And I think on a survey, like you're saying, or in a conversation, finding out what's that kid's goal for this season and what about by the time you graduate, where do you want to get? And you can have a real conversation about that, whether being the drumline captain by your senior year is in your plan if you're going to do theater and choir and AP classes and everything you got. And some kids can totally handle that. They got all the firepower for that, but others, no, just depends.
I mean, a lot of times you can tell which kid and performer is going to be the one that's leading the charge, and then you're going to find the one that's just going to be a good soldier. And a lot of times the ones that are just good soldiers, they have a lot of other things going on. They don't want the responsibility of leadership or whatever, but they're going to come in and do the job, and they're going to come in on time and they're going to leave on time, but they're not going to be able to do a lot of stuff outside of that 3-hour practice, and that's totally fine. You just need to know what that is per student and make sure your expectations are tempered to that.
And I think just keeping in touch with them and having conversations so that you know how things are going, whether they're having a good time overall during the season. That doesn't just need to be something you ask at the end, but managing expectations, just to kind of sum that up, I think it's important to set them, to be aware of what you're going to reach for, and then to make sure that you're trying to achieve what you bit off.
Right? That's when you take groups, my favorite thing is if you don't go to WGI, take a busload of kids if they're to go watch it. If you don't go to BOA, take a busload of kids if they're to go watch it. Because seeing is believing. Because a lot of times, students, they want this, or a director wants this, but when they see, a top tier group, an A class, open class, or world class come out, and they want to try to be like that, they're looking at the top groups. Look at the lower class groups and see what that entry level is like and see what you can do to at least compete with that before you go up there. And most importantly, make sure the students understand the work ethic that it takes to deliver that product that they're watching, that they like, that they're inspired by, because too often, we're all poisoned by, the iceberg analogy, right? Where you see just the peak of it sticking out of the water and everybody's like, oh, it's so beautiful, it's great. But you look under the water and you see like what it took to even like cap out of the water. Like that's, Oh no, I just think there's a lot more to it than what students don't necessarily realize, and I think it's the directors and staff's job to kind of teach that. But once you start to develop a program and that expectations becomes natural every year, then that's where you start to really feed your program, and you have to explain that less and less and less every year because it's expected, right?
Right.
I'm talking time commitment for rehearsal, to showing up knowing your music or not knowing your music, or I mean, you name it. Like all those expectations can be just really managed through culture, And I mean, it takes a few years to get that going, but once it does and you're consistent with it, it kind of feeds itself.
Yeah.
You know, like when you look at these programs where you have these like storied designers and people that are there doing it. I mean, like the Box Six guys, like they taught a class for a long time and murdered it and killed it. And they've got really strong fundamentals in their design, and that's why their groups are very successful, with what they do. So, and I'm only talking about there's lots of great designers out there, but like when we want to talk,
pretty common theme is that you paid your dues,
yeah,
and then learned the fundamentals.
We just didn't pop up and here we are. You know, I
Right.
mean, there's a lot of work that goes in behind that, a lot of practicing, a lot of errors that were made, a lot of perfection that's made from those errors that those programs are thriving now because they went through those mistakes, those successes, those standards,
Right.
And
And it takes some years just to get everyone involved to think this is important. We're all going to work
so
on this.
long.
Yeah.
It takes so long, and you have to have somebody that's in a leadership position that has the vision to look past today, tomorrow, next week, and then divide that up. Because if you don't, you're always going to be living in the now, and you're going to be chasing your tail because you're going to want that harder show than you can really do. So now at the end of the year, you're unsuccessful, and then you're starting over. It's the same mindset. Well, we're not very good.
Sure.
Well, whatever, and they're not understanding it's because of the content that's being given to them
Right.
is the reason. So, and that's where we try to come across as a business is like mentor those type of folks that hit us up and want to be able to all the eye candy and want to doctor things up. And, we just have to make sure the nuts and bolts are there too.
Yeah.
Because we want the longevity of the program to be successful. We don't want it to be a flash in the pan, right? So
That's right.
I think it's super important.
So, from the director's standpoint and from who's going to put together the whole program, you're going to have to balance factors like the time you have, the budget you have, and the performer skill levels you have. What are some things you can do just to check what your plans are against what your resources are and make sure you have a good plan?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the budget first because I think that's a big one that comes across our table a lot is somebody will, and I've got experience with my own groups where it would be, let's talk about uniforms, for instance,
Sure.
right? So a lot of times we'll get somebody who's like, hey, I've only got $2,000 to spend on uniforms. And you're like, okay, well, cool. Because that's a big difference if they've got 14 kids or 30 kids, right? Of what they can possibly get. So the first thing I tell them is like, okay, that's the wrong way to budget money. You need to or budget for your show and your stuff. You need to make sure that the performer knows exactly how much their uniform is and what you want to do. And then that can scale. You cannot scale a certain amount and then have the people...
Right,
the
because then every person you recruit diminishes what you're getting.
Yeah, it's just not necessarily the right way to do it. So as you're budgeting your stuff, I would definitely consider what is the price per performer.
If it's $100 a kid, if it's 150, 200,
yes.
whatever you've got, but do per performer.
Per performer for the needs of that performer. Uniform, equipment, sticks, mount, like whatever's not in the normal band, like supply budget. And hopefully you've got a booster program that does donate some money and support the indoor program. But yeah, so not to get on a tangent about budget, but that's the first thing that I would do is make sure that price per performer is locked in.
Yeah.
And then you can start to figure out, how much they really got to pay by based on how much the boosters want to donate. And then that can kind of come off the top, and then you can kind of figure out your math on that. But
right. So then on the show design side of things, I mean, again, checking in with your resources, where your performers are and what your time is like, where you're going to have to rehearse. I mean, obviously with time and where you can rehearse, hopefully it's December now when we're recording this, but like hopefully, months in advance, you're starting the communications about your spring gym availability, because the people who are going to have to march and do drill are going to have to be in there. Maybe your front ensemble can have the band room, or maybe everybody has to be in the gym together, but this is something that it's never too early to kind of put together your schedule and know roughly where you're going to have your battery and your pit for indoor percussion, or your percussion and your winds if you're doing indoor winds with a percussion section, etc. Just kind of have an eye on that way in advance, obviously for time rehearsing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people don't necessarily think the spaces that are available to them. So if they ask around in the school, there might be an art room that's big enough to have battery sectionals in.
Cafeteria,
like cafeteria.
Million times, right?
I mean, the amount of times that we sell a floor to somebody that's a specific size because they have to, their rehearsal space is limited. So, like, that's a thing. That's normal, right? Like, you want to make sure you're able to,
and that's the first question we ask when someone calls us and says, I want a floor. It's, well, what size do you need? And if you don't know, where are you rehearsing and how big is that space?
Yep.
Because you don't want a 50 by 100 floor and you rehearse in a 50 by 80 room and you have to fold over the sides. Yep. That's no good.
If you're fortunate enough to have a band room that's the size where you can practice in it, those are the people that are like, cool, we got this, floor size. We barely got enough room for the front, but it's our space. We don't have to fight with anybody. That has so much value in it than like, man, I just can't find a space to get up. That's fine. They just need reps. If, use the bigger time or use the time when you're in a bigger space for that value of like, we're only doing ensemble stuff here. We're not doing any sectionals while we're in the gym because that 2 hours and 2 weeks is very limited. So you're going to be hyper-focused on what that is.
Right.
So I would make sure that whoever, if you're making your schedule out, make the schedule out based on your facilities, as far as like what your goals are, not necessarily like your rehearsal times.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, everybody has a unique situation. I haven't worked with 2 schools that have the same situation between them. So you're kind of a master of your own domain in that scenario. I will say get buddy with, the person that's running the calendar for the gym and make sure that there's some accountability to that.
Right.
Because, the amount of times that, sure, there's a calendar there, but it's just suggestive, and whoever controls the calendar can like override and like, that's a no bueno. You can't work with somebody that does that kind of stuff because you've got kids that have made a schedule and you don't want to deal with somebody who has fly by the seat of things that pop up in your rehearsal time. You want a commitment, right?
Right.
The other thing that you can do is see how many churches are around that have space. I know, and not for percussion to go to, but sometimes it's easier for a winds program and a guard to travel because they're typically traveling with the instrument in their hand or equipment in their hand and in a floor, and that's it. So where drums, I mean, there's just no way, right? We have to kind of rehearse where all
with
our
the
stuff
trailer,
is.
where the pit is,
where everything's stored.
Right.
So, but there's often, I mean, we've had plenty of groups that like, cool, the battery's at this church on Wednesday nights, and we're gonna have sectionals there, and that's totally fine until the basketball team gets out of the gym, and now everybody can like start to kind of take over that space a little bit.
Right. But you got to get scrappy as a director and think about creative possibilities for what you can do.
I will say this. I think and as I'm saying this out loud, I think we're thinking about this now. The WINS programs, I think, are having a hard time getting into this space because they may already have an indoor percussion, and they may already have a guard, and they're already fighting for space and time. So how are you going to insert another third program in there that's already fighting for space? So I can definitely see that friction point and problem. So maybe that's where people start digging out and start finding those off-site places to move things that are easier to move to,
Right. Especially for the ensembles that can, and maybe that's a conversation you can have with the director of that ensemble and kind of create that.
Where there's a will, there is a way.
That's right.
And I think this activity is full of those type people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how this thing exists, right? I mean, nobody has unlimited resources. Very small percentage of schools in the country that have that. But so, I mean, most people are thrifty. You just got to be able to be smart and witty about it.
So on time, how often does your group need to rehearse? And I have a feeling this again goes back to like, well, what are you trying to get out of it?
Well, how competitive you trying to be?
Right.
So are you just doing local stuff? Are you just like having, your performers learn something to keep them busy and their hands moving.
Yep.
We have groups all the time. They just buy a show. They just want to do it for their fall, spring concert.
Yeah, sure.
No comment. It's like, yeah, it's great, and they use it for that purpose. So I think everybody's different on how they want to use it, but I think it's important that your kids are drumming at that level. Clearly, concert band's important. Do that.
Yes.
But like, how do you find time to keep your performers drumming on the stuff that they're going to be drumming in the fall?
Right.
And the only reason why I bring that up is because fall band is that's what pays the bills mostly for most band programs. Whether it's, you're doing parades, whether it's, you're the face of the community because you're at football games all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to spend the most amount of time, the most amount of resources with designers, with uniforms. I mean, you name it. Concert band requires almost none of that, right? So it's very important that you're putting your resources where that matters. Like if you are a band program that spends a lot of money in the fall, you should spend money on certain things to help feed that experience throughout the year so that you can put more value into what you're spending money on. Because too often you run across programs, they spend all this money in the fall, but during the winter, they don't really support it. Like with the band or whatever, and you're not really feeding the same fuel.
Right.
Or the fire, I guess, with the same type of fuel that you're asking the parents and the members to do in the fall with all the money and stuff. You're not investing the time prior to that to make that worthwhile.
Right. Well, I think that's, as a booster organization or as a band community, that's like, where you need to reinforce that this is important. This is a priority because I've got all these kids who are excited about it and we want to serve them. So we're going to have to make it a priority. We're going to have to budget for it and include that in our overall effort for fundraising.
I think it's about priorities and the experiences you want to give performers.
And you watch, I mean, there's so many university musicians and even high school successful musicians who excel in both realms. And I think, to like say that they're mutually exclusive makes no sense.
But I mean, when you're talking about percussionists who don't want to rest for 35 bars and hit a triangle, that's not entertaining to most percussionists out there. It's just not, I know a lot of people are going to be at me for that, but that's fine. That's just what it is, And I think indoor percussion and indoor guard and winds really cater towards that thing that they're doing during the fall and whatnot, and it kind of feeds that same skill set.
Yeah, it just depends what the directors are going to put in front of them.
Yeah.
Of course.
That's my opinion. That's not law.
Sure.
It's just what I believe and what I see programs. And I'm talking about the average program. I'm not talking about the ones that like have phenomenal concert bands and that's what's feeding their fuel and the fire and stuff like that. Like it's just, I don't know. Yeah. Different strokes for different folks.
So the time factor of how often you rehearse, again, that should go into what kind of show you're trying to run, what you're trying to get out of it, and then what show you choose. I think this is a good one to talk about. I know we've talked about it before, but it bears repeating that the material you choose should be, not just the same as what you did in the fall. Unless you have no time to give to it, then maybe it is okay if it's about the same level as what you did in the fall. If you're going to make a reach for something and you're going to try to grow the student's ability, then you need to pick something that's, just beyond. Like, what's that next step for these kids? So having an idea about what their chops are like, what tempos they're handling, what kind of vocabulary they're handling, and then when you're evaluating music choices for indoor, that's something you can be looking at. Get the perusal scores, break it down. And not to toot our own horn, but there's companies like us out there, especially us, who will do your difficulty adjustments for no cost. Mm-hmm. So you can get the right difficulty so that all your students can have that fulfilling season.
The customizability of what we can do with catalog shows, I think, is a big asset for what the client receives. Because now they're looking at the right instrumentation, they're looking at the right skill set for maybe just one section in the band. And I think that's important when you're trying to reach a success that's just tightened up a little bit on the product, that you're given. So
this is early season. You're going to have new members. You're going to have returning members. You want everybody to be having a good time at these early rehearsals. How do we make everybody have a good time at these early rehearsals and get some solid work done?
So when you're starting the season and you have the benefit of starting early, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're taking that advantage of that time to really start and slow things down. Mm-hmm. I think when I found my most successful years is when we were playing things pretty slow for longer periods of time. I do notice when I walk in and I watch groups and they're like, hey, we slowed it down for 20 minutes and now we're almost at show tempo. Like, in one rehearsal?
Right.
It's like, no. You need to sit on that for a week at that tempo, like learn that muscle memory and that skill set where it's at. I think people move way too quick, too soon on that, especially when you're given the luxury of that time to do so. Take advantage of it, do it,
Yep. The more that foundational opening tempo, if you will, that you get that and debut that music at with your performers, if it's 20, 30 clicks under, like, they're going to maintain some of that really great foundational stuff when you crank up the tempo. But if you go in the opposite order, forget it.
If you skip it, man, you end up leaving performers behind.
Right.
And what happens is your top couple percent move with your speed. And then the rest are trying to hang on, but they're not completely solid. Yeah.
Less good time every rehearsal.
Yeah.
As well.
And then what happens is you're going to find yourself in March.
Yep.
And then beginning of April, and you're like, this will never get any cleaner.
Yeah.
Because I should have spent 8 more hours in sectional at a slower tempo.
Yes.
And you cannot get that time back.
Right.
And that's the thing that I wish I really could stress to everybody is like, you cannot get that time back. The amount of time that I see groups sitting in ensemble and they're just like repping stuff and it's just ruckusy in there and there's not a lot of refinement and they don't necessarily know what they're trying to hear because it's so far from refinement, you don't know where to start. Mm-hmm. And you have to start in sectionals. You start in sectionals, you get it refined in sectionals so that smaller group of performers can do it correctly, and then you add that ingredient to the bigger piece.
Right.
Right? Because otherwise you're adding mess and this mess and this mess to just 10x mess, you know? So, and then that's where I think a lot of people have problems is when they finally see it in full ensemble. It's like, whoa, which slice of pizza do I even start eating first? And sometimes that's okay. When you get in a full ensemble situation, you start making notes of what you need to fix, and then you get out of ensemble as quick as possible. And then you start going back to sectionals and detailing that stuff.
But not pushing the ensemble, not pushing those members into a playing experience they're not ready for.
Don't rep bad habits.
Right.
Just don't rep bad habits. I mean, I think that's the big thing is, you run across a problem and you don't have a solution for it right then and there. So you just do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Next thing you know, they're building muscle memory in a reverse fashion to something that's wrong versus building it in a positive way, which is fixing something. So you're actually kind of doing yourself a disservice and digging the hole even deeper for you to get out of when you rep things that are just poor.
Right.
It's bad.
Yep.
Don't do it.
Another early season obstacle for younger performers, maybe who are trying on a new instrument in particular, is just the physicality, just like it is in marching band preseason with the physicality of wearing the instrument. I think that's something that in indoor can sometimes be forgotten because it's such a short season. Because
it's a short season. We're going to be drumming on stands for a little bit because it's fun, and then all of a sudden you put on the drum for the first time in maybe a month. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, my muscles aren't there still.
Right.
So, so it's always good to kind of keep
you got to do strength and conditioning in the winter too, and because you're gonna have if you're doing it right, you're gonna have kids inviting their friends to join the program, and maybe that's a friend who is a horn player. They're gonna use brand new muscles to carry cymbals now. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's somebody who's like not even.
Let's talk about that real quick. Yes. Cymbals is deceivingly hard.
Yeah.
So. The amount of times when we have, we've all ran across the instructors like, oh, okay, they didn't make this section, put them in the cymbal line. And then you don't have a cymbal tech. And then yada, yada. It's like, no. You do not have a cymbal line unless you have a tech. Because you just cannot, because it is such a unique and specific instrument that requires way different muscles, way different thought process. I don't know, it's just different, and from beginning to the end. And, but it needs to be nurtured in a way where somebody needs to be able to be in front of that. Because we all know, like any section, if you have a section on the floor, they have to rise to the occasion. If not, you're going to be attracted to them in a negative way, right? And you just can't let that happen.
I think a great place to start for any person who somewhat relates to what we just said of like, you think it's the EZ section regarding cymbals. If you're even a little bit in that camp,
oh my gosh,
I urge you to get a picture in your mind of what excellence behind that instrument looks like. And if, like, when I just said that, you have no idea, go take a peek. There's some amazing performers and groups out there absolutely excelling at that art form. And if you don't have that in mind for, like, where to lead those kids and what to influence them with and where do you want to go from the beginning of the season to the end, if the biggest goal you have for your cymbal section is like, man, I hope they crash on time and I hope their feet don't bury our visual score, like, you're not thinking about these kids right, and you're probably wasting a lot of their time.
I've been fortunate enough to work with some really great cymbal techs that develop that mindset and that culture in them. And, you know, when people come and audition, they're attracted by that. They know what they're getting into. And I don't know, I've always been a fan from cymbal lines from afar. Like, I don't know enough about it to, like, get in there and love it with them.
Sure.
But I sure in hell appreciate it. So, and I think there needs to be more people out there that do appreciate it, because it is a dying section, right? And you've got, you know, Chelsea at Seavine who's murdering it right now, like really keeping that going and nurturing it the way that it needs, where nobody else is. And, you know, kudos to her and Seavine for doing that.
Yeah.
Sure.
And all the cymbal performers out there keeping that culture big.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? And honestly, it's in some ways the best it's ever been, even though there's less and less groups with cymbal lines that are like that.
It's the quality per capita, dude.
Right.
I'd rather see less but better than more not doing it right.
Amen, brother. But yeah, so that we tangented off of physical preparedness for the indoor season.
I wanted to talk about the physicalness of physicality of what cymbals take to perform it right. Like, you know, we've all been to cymbal sectionals where they're playing crashes, and it's almost, I'm not going to say who cares, but if they can't hold them, it doesn't matter, you know. So start with, you know, holding them out and who can hold them out the longest for the longest amount of time.
And it doesn't need to be a stopwatch and a whistle. You can put music on. You can make it a good time and make it about progression of growth of the performer individually. You know, if your first day, you can do our physical exercises for this long. Let's grow a little bit from there. You know, you, and everybody just takes steps in the right direction, and you can get some momentum and some satisfaction out of rehearsal that way.
Yeah, I love it.
Yep. But I think for anybody who's coming into this, just don't miss the opportunity to give them the foundational strength, because, you know, I can remember back in, you know, 9th grade, first time trying on a snare drum for real and having to make the whole rehearsral, and it's like, this is just a snare drum. But, you know, 15-year-old, you're like,
I played cymbals in high school,
right?
But the way that it was presented to me was like, it's just because you didn't make snare drum. And it's a stepping stone to make bass drum and snare drum, whatever. Well, I didn't make snare drum until my junior year in high school.
Yeah.
So I played cymbals, then I played bass drum, or cymbals in the pit, then bass drum, and then snare drum. But, like, if it's treated as a stepping stone, then that's what it is. You know, like, just don't treat it as that. Treat it as, like, the thing.
Right.
That, you know, especially in indoor, you can make it that really cool thing where the 5 best horn players always come over and they're marching well, and they make it part of their culture, and they're coming up with cool visuals. I mean, it's a thing. Like, to me, that's when it thrives on its own, is when the kids are that excited about it that they want to get into it, and they've got their own club. And
woodwind players get to march drum corps on that instrument frequently, you know, getting after it. Yep.
Did you ever play cymbals, Dan?
I've never marched cymbals other than a parade. I did a Christmas parade on cymbals, and sometimes, like, corporate gigs, I'll volunteer to play cymbals.
Sure. I pinched myself a lot.
Yeah.
So I wish we had some you know, cymbal gloves back then.
I'll tell you what, though, in college band, we had a lot of parts that were playing on the cymbals that were held for us and playing on the hi-hats that were held for us as a snare line.
Oh, yeah.
And I think if you're a snare drummer, you better switch places with a cymbal player doing that at least once, so that you know what it's like to take a snare drum stick to the knuckles.
To the fingernail. I know. I've been
and
guilty.
Just the strength it takes to hold it.
I've been guilty of that.
Let's just say you don't know until you know.
Yeah.
And then you know.
Yeah. And then you're the dumb snare drummer that can't aim. So
hold the hi-hats tighter. It's like, bro. Until you've tried.
Yeah.
Yep. What are some ways to build some good community? I know we did a whole episode on camaraderie in the section, but just for early season indoor, what are some good things to make everybody feel like they're on the team? Just rapid fire.
You're talking about community within your program, or like in the circuit?
In the program.
In the program.
Make sure everybody feels like, I made the team, I'm on the team, and we're doing good stuff.
The thing that I like to talk to members about is when they're in the percussion or in band really is like they need to know that they're one of one. That's it. They're one of one. There's nobody else in the school that does what they do. So when they walk around the school or they're going home, they need to know that like they have a position. They have something they have to do. And there's nobody else in the group that can do that except for them. Whether they're one of 5 snares,
You got your own
or
drill.
one
You
of
got your own
3.
place in
Yeah,
the form?
you
Yeah,
that
that's
is
right.
your dot. A drill writer took time to give you a dot.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and the choreographer wrote something. You know, like everybody there has a place, and it may not necessarily be like what you want to do today, but that instructor hopefully is setting you up for what you want to do tomorrow. You know, and doing the right thing.
Right.
But
I think one thing that really helps get people feeling like I'm on the team, I'm doing the right thing, is make sure you incorporate praise at rehearsals. All right, like just because this early rehearsal we only worked on legato strokes, double beat, triple beat, we did some tracking to work on simple rolls at slow tempos, and we only played 4 bars of the music. Check yourself, instructors. Did you go through that whole rehearsal and only tell them what's wrong for an hour and a half or 3 hours? Now, I get the face you're making, okay? But if you don't say, bass 3, that's better than last rehearsal, thank you.
No.
You missed that less often than at last rehearsal, instructions, whatever it is.
Yeah. No, but what I was going to say is like before we're coming here to do this, it's like, man, as we're talking, I knew about some of the topics we're going to talk about, but it's like, man, what if because back a little bit, one of the podcasts we talked about, unorthodox rehearsal techniques.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it might be unorthodox to only say positive comments in a rehearsal. You know what I'm saying?
I think that would be highly unorthodox.
You know what I'm saying? Like if you went in and was just like positive comments only.
Sure.
And not a negative thing. Now, if they do something negative, you don't say, oh, that was good when it was bad.
Yeah.
You just don't say anything. You just don't recognize it was
Try
bad.
again. Those are very powerful
try
words.
Again, but
Try
don't
again.
necessarily say that it was bad or give critique. But when it's good, like let them know that. And
Yes.
I'm wondering if that changes the mentality that they're chasing that carrot now because they know that the only thing that's coming out of their mouth is going to be good. They're not waiting for the negative comment. You know what I'm saying about picking something apart.
They're always my favorite rehearsals were like that. I'll tell you
sure.
that
I bet they were. I bet they were. But a lot of instructors, you're in the heat of the moment. You only got 3 hours or 2 hours, so you got to fix that right then and there.
Yeah.
So you want to make a comment on it. But maybe you think about like what the Saturday rehearsal is going to be like. Saturday is a 9-hour day. It's going to be full of negative stuff.
Right.
Let's take this 3 hours on Thursday to hype it up for Saturday.
Tell them what was good.
Yeah.
See if they don't leave that rehearsal with a little more spring in their step. Bet you they do.
Yeah.
And I will say for myself, if I catch myself going on too long of a streak where I can feel it in myself that I've just been giving correction, negative, all that, at least I'll try to throw out a disclaimer of like, hey, I want you guys to know you're doing 100 things right. I'm only pointing out the stuff that's wrong.
Yeah, I think that's always
bears
good.
saying once in a while,
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because as a technician, you're in work mode. You're finding flaws. I guess
Right.
what you're doing.
Blur your vision, see whose feet are slow.
As a technician, that's your job.
But what about all the other kids, right? Like,
as a leader,
Right.
you should be on the positive side.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like as a tech, you're trying to find.
I like that. Be a technician and a leader. Don't let one of them go cold.
Yeah, because you can. I've been all of one or the other, rarely both in the same rehearsal, and that's hard to do sometimes.
Right.
The best people are the ones that can do that, and.
So I think this segues great into managing performer development. And even going back to our first point about satisfaction of, your expectations and how everybody feels. But what do you do when you have varying skill levels in the group? Baseline level, maybe this is somebody's first time experiencing this. I've got my good kids. I've got my more beginner kids. How can I make... especially if you're the only one running the show and everybody's in the same room, that's the hardest version.
I'll tell you the biggest problem that I see with the best instructors even is people stand in front of the best player when they're teaching the line. They stand in front of the center marimba. They stand in front of the center snare. They stand in front of the center quad. They don't go stand next to bottom bass. They're not standing behind the back vibe player. They're not standing beside the rack player. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to put yourselves in yourself in their position from a listening environment to understand where they're catching certain things, to really understand like how they're fitting in the ensemble. But when you're talking about the how to deal with the weaker players,
Yeah.
like that's where I'm at. Like you teach to the problem, but you teach that solution to the whole group.
Yeah.
And you may not call Johnny and Susie out by name, but you may stand in front of them and talk about the problem they're experiencing, but you have the whole group's attention.
Yeah.
And like I found out that's the best way, where you don't necessarily single out a performer, but the whole group gets to learn from the mistake, and then you don't find yourself in front of the best player experiencing the MIDI file over and over again.
Right.
Like that's the biggest problem, is like people hear it for what it's supposed to be versus like what it is. And then once you start moving out to the outskirts of the ensemble is where you really start hearing what it is. You know what I'm saying? What versus what it's supposed to be.
So yeah, like giving your attention,
Literally
giving your attention.
Yeah, to the weaker player, because that center snare doesn't need you right now. He needs you to fix that problem.
Sure.
Or she needs you to fix that problem, whatever it is, And
on basic skills, everybody needs them too. Like, I mean, we can all attest, teaching the highest level groups, that you're still going to be reinforcing the correct technique on the basic skills. Yeah. It's what it's all built on.
Well, center snares all deserve comments too. Let's be real.
That's right.
Your heights are too high. You got center snare syndrome.
Yep.
Your taps are 4 inches higher than everybody else.
Yep.
But I'm trying to make everybody listen to me. No, you got to blend like everybody else,
Right.
So like that type of stuff needs to be spoken to about them, like in that scenario. But yeah, I mean, but initially it's just like you got to spend time with the weaker players, and that's just it.
And when you do need to have everybody play like exercise packages together, sometimes I've seen some really creative basics packets that had like a track A line and a track B line, that kind of thing, where above, when we go to above this tempo, I'm going to have these players who are, more beginners.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about
part,
like on a performance level, I mean, there's a lot of groups out there that will use a flub line as an upper battery training session.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times those flub lines might even have netted heads on them, or mesh heads, right? Where they're
on one drum or something.
On one drum, right. Where they're getting like more of the visual and marching coordination experience, so that the next time they get on a drum that has like, no room for error,
right,
they've already got some skills under their belt, so they can kind of step into that. And I see the programs that have a higher tier entry point for their upper battery, that they will have like a secondary tier, just so that the members can they can move up the food chain. There's a few more steps to get to that next thing versus like, oh, I was bass drum, now I've got to play this.
Right.
It's it provides a little bit more of a bridge, I guess, on certain things. Marimbas all day long. You see groups with 4 marimbas. 3 really need to be there. 4th one's in training.
Sure.
So the 4th one, you talk to the designer, be like, hey, block chords only, 2 mallets only, whatever it is. And some people are like, well, they don't look like the other marimbas. Who cares? That kid is successful. Now, are they playing match when everybody's playing traditional? No, not like that. But like, it's okay to write a different marimba part. It's okay to write a different vibe part or whatever, as long as they're contributing in a way that allows the orchestration to come across to what's intended. Then that's all that really matters.
Right.
I mean, I've had students in the past where like, it's band. Like you find a spot for somebody unless they just physically and mentally cannot handle it, or they just can't show up to enough rehearsals, so you just can't use them, and they're hurting the rest of the group. I mean, that's the thing.
Sure. Right.
And sometimes you got to make that decision. There is no instrument they can play because they're not here enough to even maintain that, so it affects everybody else's experience, right? When you were marching, you're in some competitive lines. Clearly, you're not having weak people in there, right? Because they had to make the line, But top tier groups still have a weaker link, what I'm saying, whether it's in the snare line or wherever. What are some things that you experienced that the staff catered towards that weaker part of the chain? Clearly they deserve to be there in those groups because they went through the audition process, but there's still going to be a weaker part of it, right?
Sure.
It's just the nature of it, right? And everything's on the same level. So what are some things that you experienced in those upper tier lines?
I'll tell you what, one of my favorite things, and I'll even take one where I was the example, right?
I bet, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, man. But there was an instance where a vet of the group was told, hey, you live near Dan, Dan's your buddy. You guys are going to drum together during the week, And we were friends.
Yeah.
But it absolutely put it on hyperspeed. You know what I mean? Just having somebody who had already been there, done that, to kind of give some reassurance during the week, to give the extra reps.
Sure. So basically they partnered you up with a better player, this understanding.
With a better player and a peer. Instead of obviously another way would be like, all right, you've got an extra private lesson you need to go to with the instructor. So but even just with a peer.
Knowing that they assigned you to somebody, did that turn something else on at that point? Or awareness, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, I have somebody.
Both.
Okay,
okay. Yeah, but I think it really, makes you feel like everybody's looking out for the end result. They believe in you. It didn't make me feel like they didn't believe in me. It made me feel like,
sure,
cool, now I'm not.
Well, I should never feel like that, but I'm just kind of curious, like, when somebody shines a light on something.
Yeah.
Like, there's a certain amount of pressure that's there. Even a top tier group.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, I made the line. I'm here.
Right.
But I'm still working at it.
Yep.
Well,
I think you need to cultivate the humility of every single performer, that it's okay to not be good and then to get good. That's the nature of what we're all doing here. So, you need to make that
and every
baseline level.
Every group has probably a floating baseline every year, depending on the talent, right? Because you have to have a grading curve based off the talent that comes in that year.
Sure.
I know at Mystique, our curve this year was pretty high, say, from 3 years ago. You know what I'm saying? And so I know other top tier groups go through that too, to where their level of acceptance it just changes, right?
Right.
On the audition process, not the end game.
Right, yeah.
But who comes in the door sometimes is, a lot of groups, you take the talent that you feel comfortable with at that time, And that doesn't mean they didn't deserve to be there. It just means that you just had to shine a light on that problem a little more and give it a solution. So that's it. Yep. So, and some groups have to do that less.
Right. But if you have inexperienced players, which every group's going to have some version of that.
Oh, absolutely.
I think the best things to do are be upfront about it in a positive way. Right? Let that person know. It's not just that, like, hey, you're going to be a projector. I'm going to be talking a lot to you. That doesn't make anybody feel good.
No, but I'll say a problem that I've experienced in the past is a kid comes in with really good hands. And it's something that we all call pad hands, right? Where they can play all the licks in the world, but they can't play with the person next to them, right? Those are the ones that typically slip through the cracks in auditions. And then you find out a month or two later when now it's your problem.
Sure.
Those are the higher end issues that groups at certain levels deal with. And the finer you can get your... the more you can fine tune your audition process to weed that stuff out, whether it's playing certain things or having somebody play with somebody else during auditions, like those kind of things that you can kind of figure out sooner than later, especially if you're noticing that somebody has that type of scenario.
Well, that's where I think playing down the line.
Right, but I think what I'm getting at is those type people typically don't know they're the problem because they were the ones that were the best in their previous program, so they didn't get those type of comments, and now they're going to be the one in the higher level program that gets those comments. You have to be more forward with those people than anything else I found.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because otherwise they're like, oh, it's him picking, not me.
Right.
You gotta pull out the ruler and be like, no.
Right.
No, that's not how this goes. Here, check this, play this.
Yep.
How you're not lining that up, I just think there's a lot to it. There's different levels of acceptability.
Sure.
Say that,
no, absolutely. But I mean, what are the three big pillars? Not that these are but
the end all be all.
We've both heard these three things: attitudes, skills, and beliefs. And if you get somebody who has great attitudes and great beliefs about what they could get to, but they're not as high on the skills level, we can work with that, right?
Sure.
But if you have someone who's got, pretty decent skills, pad hands, you can play some licks, but maybe doesn't have a good attitude or doesn't have and I think the discipline.
Attitude and discipline is everything,
right?
Man. That's a whole nother podcast, man. Seriously, we could go down with that, but talk about past experiences, end results of what was this performer like when they first got there than what they ended up as, good or bad, but it all had to do with their attitude, had nothing to do with their playing, you know.
And I don't know if attitude is something you can necessarily teach. It's something that you can be a good role model for. You can show what having a good attitude is like, and you can make that a value of your program. But that's just something you can't wrestle anybody into changing for themselves. Really.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
You know, other than just to show them like, hey, water's fine over here. I don't know where you're at, you know.
Man, sometimes people just can't get out of their own way.
Yep.
And that's just, it is what it is.
All right, so great communication is going to fuel the success of your ensemble preseason, during season, postseason. So pre is important to mention because even having your plan for when communications are going to happen, what are the signs that communication isn't working between your instructional staff, designers, and performers?
Sure. I can speak from a designer side of things. When communication is breaking down on my end, I can tell that things aren't materializing on the floor the way that I expected. And for me, that's going back to the spreadsheets that I use and making sure that information was in there to begin with. And then if it was, I want to make sure, are they just not there yet in the production process,
Yep.
or do they had pulled an audible and went some in another direction or whatever.
So this is you in the designer's shoes.
This is me in a designer's
reflecting on the
shoes.
instructors and the students,
reflecting on the product from my communication to them to get the job done. Like I can start to see, okay, well maybe I wasn't clear on that. Let me figure out that. And for me, if they don't ask in our initial meetings or the design process, and typically most people do, but if it gets to the point where now they're drill writer, or maybe I wrote the drill and they're having to fill in choreo, just whatever that extra layer is that they have to do, that's where I want to follow up on and make sure, hey, that didn't come across the way that we talked about. Are you just not there yet in production? Do you have questions? Yada, yada. So that's kind of what I do with it. But most importantly, you have to have all the technology and the apps in place to do that in real time, right? I mean, we live in the future now.
Yes.
And
communication is two ways, always.
It is two ways.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, it's just, we deal with it here at the business. Today I was like, hey guys, you got to tag me in something. I just can't see something. It's just communication things happen at all walks of life. And whether you're handling one other person or a whole team of 50 other people, there's always processes to be followed.
Right.
And
but there's the feedback that you're talking about getting from watching a show and seeing how it's going, and doing some reflection on, this is what I had in mind, this is what I put in my communication to them, and now here's what I'm seeing.
Sure, yeah.
I need to send a message,
Well, send a message, or just for me, it's like, okay, what if we have a checklist? And you, as the other end of the receiving party that has to get this stuff done, you're going through doing checklists. Hey, I did this part. We cleaned this drill. How does it look? We added this choreo in. Is it correct? And that way the designer, because we know a lot of people out there have relationships with their designers, right? So, but you want to make sure that you have a correct or a clear line of communication and expectations from the designer. Because the reason why people hire designers, because they can't do it themselves, but they know they teach really well. They just need somebody to give them the content so they can produce it, right? Well, you should have to make sure that that line of communication and the ways that that's being delivered is clear. Sometimes it's video. Sometimes it's a spreadsheet. Sometimes it's just, a bullet point checklist of things, and it can be, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just to be clear and consistent with the people that you're working with.
I think the only wrong way to do it is too infrequent or without any direction or purpose.
Let's talk about infrequency. So I worked with a band program once where the band parents complained to the band director that they didn't communicate enough. I thought they did. Okay. So they changed it. They sent 2 to 3 emails a day just to make sure that everybody was up to date on everything. You know what happened? They didn't check their emails because they were getting too many a day. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So it's like, you have to find that happy medium of what is that perfect level of communication where people can digest it and also apply what's being given to them.
Right.
Because like, I can run into the habit of giving people too much information and they're just overflowing like, yo, step one, let's start there.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that sometimes my brain works as a stream of consciousness. I'm lucky enough that people around me, they know how my brain spills out. But if a design team does not have that kind of connection with the people they're working with, it may not come across that way or not come across the way that it's intended to, or the expectation isn't clear, that kind of thing.
What about even like, what are the communications that we're going to have this season? When you're the designer and you're starting to give people their stuff, have you established that this isn't just a one-way, I'm just going to send it to you and I'm never going to hear from you again?
Yeah,
or is it like, we're going to talk, we're going to have this?
So I put the ball in the client's court, because there's always different levels of expectancy, I guess, from where the client is needing stuff to get done. So in other words, we might have someone that we're working with that is, they got it. They just need the music and the drill. They'll fix anything. They can produce stuff. Like they got
a deep bench on their side.
They're good.
Right, sure.
And then you have people that are like, I need to talk to you every week. I need to send in a video. I'm like, great. And that's what I tell everybody. You can every time you send in a video, I will make comments on it. But you've got to make sure that when you send me a video, you're asking me what to give a comment on. Because what happens is somebody's like, here's a video. And I'm like,
see anything in there?
I was like, I can be here for 6 hours talking about this. So is there a specific 30 seconds that you want to produce that you need an idea on? Or need further clarification on?
Right.
Is there something that you've cleaned and you want to make sure that it reaches the level of expectation? Can they move on to something else? Is it, hey, we're dead in the water in this transition. What can we do with this? And those are kind of consulting questions sometimes, because clearly if we're designing something, we already know what's going to be there. But we'll get people that are like, hey, I need to know what I can do with this moment for 30 seconds. Here's the music. Here's my staging thing. What do you got? You know?
Kind of gaps in their program coordination.
I like doing that kind of stuff, because it's like you have, somebody else's piece of clay. You can help them mold a little bit, and that's always fun, to be able to kind of get in a sandbox and play a little bit like that, especially when you don't have the responsibility of having to finish the product for them.
Right.
You can just jump in for 30 minutes to an hour and be like, here's your solution to all your problems, and then jump back out and then let them take the keys and move on. So, but for me, the communication level has to start with, as a designer, or if you're a director and you want to tell the members, hey, you're going to get music every 3 weeks. Or
there's a great expectation to communicate about.
Or every 2 weeks, or every month, or hey, when you guys show up to rehearsal, I expect you to know this or not know this. Like for me, and I'm glad you brought this up, from when I was young, I was at a program that had a lot of talent in it, but they didn't necessarily know how to practice. And it took me a year to figure that out. I was there for 12 years, but it took me a year, probably or two, to really figure that out, because I would come into rehearsal and expect them to know more than they did. And so what I learned is I fixed my solution, or came up with my solution to the problem was, I physically told them, I don't want you to practice at home at all. Anything new, I don't want you to practice at all.
New stuff.
Any new stuff.
Right.
So, but what I did was I changed it so that they were expected to learn everything that we went over in class time. So, and we would only learn like 4 to 8 bars a day.
And then maintain that.
And they had to maintain that, whatever. Right. But and it helped me lower my blood pressure. It was just like, it was my expectation of what I expected. And then they knew that they didn't have to really look ahead on music. They could just maintain what we did in class. And we started leveling up pretty quick. It was because we were able to kind of get in that smooth routine of, we learn it, we clean it, we move on. And it was at the pace that I went.
Sure.
It wasn't at the pace that I expected them to look ahead. Because I think what happens is a lot of instructors, they expect the students to come in and then the instructor just gets to produce it. There's too many people out there that forget you have to teach the whole way.
Yeah.
There's not a part where you're just like, cool, let's just play it. Okay, do it again. This is fun. Like, that's just not it.
You can, I mean, if you eventually build your program up to get some real stellar culture and skills that's a certain baseline, I get that you get a head start. But
those are few and far between, and we can probably name all 10 of them. You know what I'm saying? Like in the country. So, but normally people are teaching to the end, is some aspect, you know, and yeah, that's still a tough one though, man, to manage and to make sure that people are getting all the information, and most importantly, as a designer, you're getting the information back from them, you know, that says, hey, I have a problem. Can you fix this?
If you're writing custom music and you write the opener at one level and they don't give you any feedback about it, but it was too hard.
Struggling. And it's just like, I don't want to see that. They send me a video at the end of the year. Look at us at state championships. We didn't make finals, but thanks.
Or 6 weeks later asking you to rewrite everything.
Yeah, it's like, you don't have time to clean this in 2 weeks for your end, you know? So...
so as far as like the instructor communication, I mean, that's again, whoever's going to be teaching the group needs to be given that feedback back up the chain to the designer of how things are going, and to the kids setting an expectation. You know, there's nothing wrong with at the beginning of the week saying, you know, we're handing out music on Wednesday. We'll
put it this way. When you were a member, you probably could sense the communication breakdown of staff. You could tell.
Oh, man.
You know when it's happening.
Look, I was in an independent A group and an independent open group for many years before doing anything world class. So, yeah, all the struggles, baby. All those independent groups.
Okay, this is a good...
When's music coming? Is the same person even writing the music at the end of the year who started at the beginning of the year?
This is a good topic right now to discuss, because there's a lot of groups out there that start young. We're talking about the members. I'm talking about the people that just, you know, start up a drum line out of their backyard. I mean, like, all drum lines do that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like literally how you have to start, right?
Be resourceful,
Yeah, that's how Mystique started. So, but if those same people attack it with, oh, this is easy. Oh, I'm going to be able to do this. And they don't communicate all of it to the members, you know what I'm saying, about like the demand, the difficulty, the commitment, or whatever, and they're not able to kind of like present those expectations to the membership and keep that consistent. As a member, even at the lower level groups, you know it's not going right. And sometimes those instructors think, oh, well, they're young too. They're not really understanding. So we're all on the same page. And the answer is no.
Right.
The answer is no. All kids are pretty smart enough to know that they've been around high level of productions, listening to music all day long. It's very highly produced music. Everybody's ears and eyes are tuned in to what we see and what we hear at such a high level. And when you're experiencing something at such a really raw level where humans have to make the music and you're starting at the ground zero with that stuff. And if performers aren't reaching that level of what they feel is produced soon, then that's when they start to question things.
Yeah. Where's the cool part? When's the cool part coming?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The days of, playing a tune down from the music and just, let me arrange this cool song I like, top to bottom.
Right.
Like, those days are over. Like, as an arranger and a designer, you're in there to figure out how to get the best out of whatever music somebody did that's not meant for our idiom, but we're using a hook or a through line for something. And it's our job to make sure that that's the cool part of whatever they're doing. But going back to communication, if that instructor or staff member or whatever isn't really communicating their needs to the designers correctly, you're not going to get the product that you need to be successful. You're going to be lying,
Right.
So, and wasting your money, just being frank. And that's what I tell people when I work with them is like, look, it's expensive to get a custom show, but if they're not ready for it, I always change it to like, let's do a catalog show this year. We'll do a custom visual because every visual needs to be custom.
Custom anyway.
But the music stuff we can customize your catalog show so it feels like a custom show, but you're not paying that.
Right.
And you're in the weeds teaching Mystique every weekend and whatnot. Like, what are some of the valuable tools that you guys have found communicating back and forth with the members? And like, what's that process like? Weekly goals, they're doing lessons, they're doing like, hey, play those 16 bars that Shane wrote because you can't play it yet. Let's test you on it.
Sure.
Whatever that is.
We do frequently, not in all cases, but we do utilize homework assignments with videos in the off time because we have people living all over the country who are driving to Nashville every weekend. As far as like regular communications, where we use the apps that are out there. So
Which ones?
We've got GroupMe that we use, and I don't know what the Scholastic groups, obviously you have to use the tools that you're allowed to use, but for an independent group like us, we use GroupMe that can communicate to the entire app or the entire group, all members, all staff, so that can be an instant from the director or whoever, or whose shoes are these left in the band room, any of that kind of stuff.
What Trello? We used to use Trello.
We've done Trello in the past, on the staff level in particular. GroupMe, we have our Facebook groups that would be for like posting videos or things like that. That's where our homework assignments would happen. But then aside from just how we're communicating with the various apps that are out there, which there are many, if you're not using any, I'd recommend using something, right? To make sure everybody can in today's day and age, you should be able to communicate with the whole group instantaneously.
Sure, yeah.
And if it's during the school day, obviously kids shouldn't be on their phone during the school day, but you should be able to get all the parents in an email and a text, whatever it is, or all the kids, and, coordinate, get all the horses running in the same direction.
Oh, yeah.
But then, as far the other really valuable thing I think that Mystique does well in communication is regular communications, to where we know that every Wednesday night is a staff meeting that all the staff are going to be on, that we know that the members are going to have their wrap-up meeting at the end of the weekend, and then the leadership of the members have a separate meet with the director to talk about, any kind of internal issues that need to be resolved or move forward or logistical things. But just knowing that we have those spaces designated and times to be able to talk to the members, and obviously all the techs with their own sections, in sectionals and, before and after rehearsal are able to kind of get a feel if the music's going well.
That's good. Let's talk real quick about, the communication at the end of rehearsals. How do you feel about that versus the beginning of rehearsal?
How do you mean?
We see it's rampant. Everybody at the end of the rehearsal,
Sure.
Pull it in, guys. Let's talk about the rehearsal. Johnny, you did this. Susie, you did.
We can talk about the pull it in, guys.
You would much rather do that type of stuff at the beginning of rehearsal. Hey, Johnny, you don't put out a lot of energy in rehearsal. Today, I'm going to expect to see you.
Right.
Putting out some more
energy. If it
energy.
has anything to do with
I hate wish I coulda, woulda, shoulda. Right. At the end of the rehearsal. I wish you would have done this in the 3 hours that I didn't mention it. I hate that.
Okay, I'm glad that you brought this up, actually, because this is super important. The end of rehearsal, wrap up, like you said, is going to be in one ear and out the other. If it's hey, that third note.
Logistics.
You never, right.
Straight up logistics. Who's mopping this floor over here?
Correct.
Who's cleaning that bathroom?
And a preview of what next weekend's going to be, or what next rehearsal is going to be.
You did not talk about what happened in rehearsal, performance-wise, execution-wise.
No.
You do that at the beginning of the rehearsal.
Yes.
And I think that's a good habit that people need to start to get into, because too often you'll just start the rehearsal. All right, guys, set up so-and-so, let's go. And the kids are like, well, what are we doing today? And maybe that's something where you've got a whiteboard in the drum room. Hey, guys, phrase of the day is C to E and G to I.
Right.
And that's all we're working on today. So they know during class time, hey, I got 5 minutes. Let me pick this out, or whenever we're going to work on this.
Sure.
So, but that keeps everybody hyper-focused on what you're doing, because, throughout the season, you're eating that one piece of pizza out of the whole thing all season. So you want to make sure everybody's eating that same piece of pizza that day.
Right.
And if you talk about it at the beginning of rehearsal, they're focused and they know, hey, you know what? We're not going to work on the ending today. So I don't need to work on brain power of stressing about, am I going to make that move today? Because I'm not working on it.
Yeah.
I can really focus on, these 20 bars or so that the staff's really focusing on.
Yeah, given the plan, the objectives, the I need you all to focus ons, the I need more effort from you, and you on blank. That's beginning of the rehearsal stuff.
That's beginning of the rehearsal.
Right.
But that's such low-hanging fruit that not a lot of people do that.
Sure.
They try to recap at the end of the rehearsal. And I've been super guilty of it. But the reason
we all have at some point.
Oh, yeah. But you at some point you just realize that's just the trash way of doing it.
Yeah.
Because you're not really setting the members up for success. You're not, lowering your blood pressure by, having to deal with these things. And at the end, it's all right, guys, now 2 more days when we rehearse again, I want you to remember this.
Right.
It's no, do it at the beginning of rehearsal so it's fresh.
Yep.
So, but just to kind of piggyback on the communication side of things about how, because you want to make communication a process and a practice, right? And if you make it the beginning of every rehearsal, hey, this is what we're doing. The kids know, they come in, they sit down, they wait. What's next?
Yep.
What are we doing today?
Right.
You know that on every Wednesday night you're going to have a staff meeting. So the staff knows their communication, the members know theirs. The parents know that every Friday morning an email is going out.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They know that they're not going to get junked up emails all week long. They know, hey, as a parent, I know that this email they send me every Friday is important and I need to read it because it's going to recap what went on that week and what's coming up.
Right.
That's it.
Yep.
And that's fine. That's the variable that I found that has been the most successful is when you find consistent communication to the members, consistent communication to the staff,
right,
consistent communication to the parents.
Right.
You get those three things locked down and you're golden.
Yep. So. I mean, I can tell you just for example, like a pretty typical end of weekend flow, and this isn't just to the members, but like in the background, this is what people don't see. So Sunday rehearsal wraps up. The members, they do all their stuff. They have their wrap-up meeting with
like
the director.
Some sections load the truck, some sections
right.
mop, some whatever.
But our staff meets, right? While all the members are doing their stuff, we'll have a staff wrap-up meeting at the end of Sunday. How far did you get in the music? How is this going? Like honestly diagnosing how the weekend went and what we need to turn up and turn down. What knobs do we need to turn for next weekend and during the week? That information, that's Sunday afternoon. By Monday, that information has worked its way up to any design or directors Monday, Tuesday, so that any like organizational, something with the music schedule, like, hey, we're ready for more music, Shane, or we're not, or, any of that stuff can be pretty quickly communicated to you by the end of the previous weekend. Mm-hmm. Then we have a plan for if music's coming out and when. Then the caption heads have already talked about the facilities, the general plan. Wednesday, we have the full staff meeting. Everybody else finds out what the plan is for the coming weekend based on the feedback from the last. We're getting our assignments in that we, probably on Monday or Sunday night or Monday, the staff are sending out any homework assignments to the kids. We're getting those turned in by Thursday, make sure that they're quality. I am not a fan of having any video rehearsal stuff turned in on Friday because there's no chance to even digest that feedback. You're already driving to rehearsal. Forget it. You need to give them some time to digest. So Wednesday or Thursday is best for that. And then we do it all over again on the weekend. But it's, making sure that you're springboarding off of that last rehearsal as a staff, but not expecting some wrap-up meeting at the end of the weekend to make the difference for the members. That's not where the magic's going to happen.
Yeah, just in the end, you got to be careful about over-communicating too. So you can get lost in the sauce. Because every group has its own nuanced problems. And a lot of times they don't need to be looked at as problems. They're just like roadblocks, things you just got to go around, or maybe it's a fixture of the program itself. That just has a unique part of their characteristic or rehearsal space needs. I mean, you name it. You know what I'm saying? Like right. Everything you have to figure out how to get in where you fit in.
So in design, some issues that might come up are you've got all your eggs in one basket and you find out that that's not going to take you there for some reason. It's just not going to come together. Maybe that was, I was going to have these band parents build these new props for me. But something came up. Those parents aren't available. That kid moved out of town. Let's say you had all your eggs in the props basket or the sound design basket and you didn't get that piece of equipment or, when plans change, that's when you find out what you're made of a little bit. But what are some creative ways to outthink some of those problems and what's the bigger picture that we need to realize instead?
You got to have a dreamer on your design team, and then you have to have somebody who is a realist. And if you only have realists or you only have dreamers on your design team, you're going to find all those problems.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? As a dreamer, you're not going to see it, and as somebody who's a realist, you're never going to be creative. You're just going to be doing the thing that gets you down the road. You know what I'm saying? So it's good that you have somebody on your design team that is one or the other, which one you are, but to me, that's like sometimes can be some of the common problems that you would run into is the personalities and then trying to come up with those solutions to the problems you're talking about. Because let's just say, you know, you design a show around a prop, which happens a lot. Like I saw this really cool thing on Pinterest or on this video, yada, yada. And, you've got your whole emotional connection wrapped around this and it doesn't come out the way that you're thinking it is. I'll tell you the biggest one that people make is like, I want a quick change uniform. I saw this on a video where somebody takes it and all they think they want it,
right?
And they're not realizing that thing cost $1,000 for that one person to do it.
Took months to make.
Yeah, it's not that easy. So I mean, we like to entertain those discussions for as far as we can go, but at some point you just have to pull the plug and be like, "What's Plan B?" You know what I'm saying? Because there has to be a Plan B. And but it's okay to dream and think like that, but you always have to have a Plan B. You know what I'm saying? Right. And if you are dead set on it, you better have, come hell or high water attitude about it by any means necessary, and you go make that happen.
If it's going to be something that's absolutely essential to your success,
yeah.
I would make that a really high priority.
Make it a high priority,
down.
But also identify that in the design process.
Right.
Like, hey, this show will not work without X, Y, and Z. And then that's the thing that you focus on first. In the design discussion, you're focusing on, can we build it? Mm-hmm. Can we afford it? Can it get into a gym? Can we break it down and put it on a truck?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Can the students be taught how to run it?
Exactly. Like all of that and a bag of chips has to be figured out before you really get emotionally attached to something.
Yeah.
Once you can do that, then the rest of it is good to go. I know at Mystique, like we've been fortunate enough to have like a light engineer. Not a lot of groups have that. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because we have clients that hit me up like, hey, we want to do lights and yada, yada. And I go, cool. Do you have this dollar amount? Do you have, these machines to work on it? And most importantly, you may not have somebody that can design it. I can find somebody that can design your light show. Do you have somebody that can run it and problem solve on the ground? And if you can't answer all those things, you don't need to be doing lights.
Right.
And that is an entry point that people need to realize that like, yeah, it's fun. It can add stuff to your show. It can also take a lot away from your show if it doesn't work right.
Yep.
And, live by the sword, die by the sword.
Oh, yeah. And as Mystique and other groups have definitely seen, and I did think there was some real poetry to the first year that WGI allowed lights, that RCC did the gift when it was like the only, out of the top 5, they were like the only group that didn't use lights and they got the gold.
Sure.
And I thought there was some good poetry there. Everybody was like shiny and went for the lights. Didn't end up getting on the gold at least.
That's right.
That was a sick show, by the way. You guys, good job.
Sure. But the big thing with the light situation and the problems is like, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So you can always dream big, but until you really look under the covers and realize like, yeah, we can't do that. Then you just need to change your idea, move on, Plan B. But I think there should always be a plan B in things. There's been plenty of my own ideas that I've shot down that we're like, we got to do X, Y, and Z. And then, Josh, the realist on the design team's like, no, that's not going to fit on a truck. Or no, we don't have enough bodies to bring that on the floor. Or no, it's too expensive. Or, just whatever.
Right.
But that doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And it has to happen.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. And if it doesn't, then we'll find ourselves in a situation where we design something around something that won't ever exist.
Or you can always just do something else. Something I've heard you talk about is that your show needs to have that and.
Yeah, the and.
What's the thing that's gonna? If you haven't before, treat yourself to watching 25 groups or 30 groups in a row. Like go to WGI. And,
it's hard to do.
Right, it is hard to do.
It's hard to do.
And then try to remember the difference between the third group who went on and the fifth group who went on and who was a little bit cleaner or who had a little bit better visual presence and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it soon emerges that the most memorable groups are going to be the ones who had that special something. They did that unique, but it's not that it was a specific thing. It's that they were thoughtful to give the audience something sticky that's going to be remembered. It doesn't have,
Well, the people that are watching us perform are not us a lot of times. They're our parents, cousins, meemaws, papaws.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's our friends that you got to come watch. So what are you going to give them to chew on because us as, music nerds are like, oh, look how fast they played them flam drags, or look at that choreo while they're doing that role. We know that's hard.
Right.
But Meemaw, Papaw, Cousin Timmy, Aunt Lucille, they're going, did you see when they did that?
Yeah.
I liked it when this group played this music because I recognized it. I like it when they brought out this prop of feathers and they covered up this person and then they brought it away and then they disappeared. That was neat.
Right.
Like those things, that's the and effect that you have to be able to bring to your program that that other groups aren't doing what you're doing. Because 90% of what you do, you're already doing the same thing as somebody else. You're playing music, you're marching, you're doing choreo, you're wearing a cool uniform. And
is everybody else.
Yeah. So okay, now you're competing at the quality in which you do that at.
Right.
Give yourself a little bit of an extra edge and just memory value in that.
Just top of mind without even specific shows, but a visual set that looks so different from everybody else. Now, again, it doesn't mean more money. It could just be different, right? You put some thought into what is the audience going to see again and again and again and again, and then my group comes out and they see this, and it's different, memorably so. That's a great one. Using equipment or props, like I've seen drumming on cool things. Last year's A-class champion was my alma mater. I was very proud. But, they're drumming on pieces of pipes or whatever like that. But again, it was probably different than a bunch of other groups. They had something that you'd remember, that little ting sound or whatever. So whether you have a different piece of equipment, I've seen guards spin non-traditional things many times. Or, last year, Paramount had those flags that weren't attached to the poles, and the silks were sliding all over the poles in a unique way. It's again, no other group was doing that, and it didn't cost them any more money. It was just creative choice. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big thing is if you got your heart broken because, oh man, I was going to do these 20-foot tall props, and I'm sure that was going to be it for me, but then that goes out the window. Just get back, put your creative hat back on and think of what is going to be unique to this audience that just watched all these shows in a row. What's going to stick with them?
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback on that is that a lot of people go for the loud effect, the high energy effect that has the things you want to remember, right? But there's been so many subtle effects in the past that I've that is really, really cool.
Yeah.
And that stuff that sticks with you, touch for the next. Yeah. Life After Life, North Glen years ago, 25 years ago, something like that. So there's events out there and really cool, unique effects that weren't loud. They just drew your attention in, but they had such a visual, cinematic, and emotional value to it that it wasn't drums that you remember, it was something else besides drums,
right.
Of course, I remember the effects that people did while drumming, I remember it was one year RCC, I forgot what year it was, but they had a really cool snare lick. It was just flam drags. It was just chut-chita, 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 and they just kicked it in high gear. It was really, really cool. And I was just God, I'm not saying it was easy, but the concept was simple.
Right.
And you look back at Unk's years when they won drums so many years in the early 2000s, it was they played the same drum solo over and over again. What it felt like, you know what I'm saying?
Similar vocab.
Yeah, it was the tap six thing, but they just kind of repeated that a little bit. And it was the same repeated vocabulary, and it was done in a way where they did it. Oh, I get it. Oh, now they're doing it faster. Whoa, and that's when Cousin Timmy, Aunt Lucille, Papa, all those people, they got that moment.
Yeah.
They didn't understand how difficult it was. It didn't matter. They just knew that was energy coming at them, and they appreciated that. Now imagine cadets if they did the same type of energy amp up, but they just did different vocabulary every bar. It wouldn't be digestible the same way,
Mm-hmm.
Just for the fact that it was repeated like that gave them that and effect, even though that it was drums,
right?
Yeah, and
nice tension and release
moment.
Yeah,
and that's hard to do for drummers sometimes to be you know what, I'm just going to play this one thing a lot,
sure,
because we just we look at it sometimes as I want the performers to play a lot. You look at quantity sometimes versus quality. Along with the and effect, I think if groups brought people in that didn't know squat about the activity to give them thoughts.
Yep.
And I call it like the Joe Blow scenario, right? Where you go across the street at a gas station, you find the next guy, you come in, hey, come and check something out. It's really neat. You're going to like it. Give me 10 minutes of your time. Like, cool. To come in there. You run your show or segment you want them to look at, and you ask them, what did you notice? What were you looking at? What did you hear? And they'll be like, well, I'm watching the snare drums over here, like change their drums. And you're like, well, there's a quad break going on the left side. So the fact that they weren't watching the quads and looking at somebody fumble something, like that's a problem.
Yeah.
Like, but a lot of times designers or, you're a young instructor, you're designing yourself, trying to figure it out. You may be lost in the sauce and not focusing in on that, where like the layman comes in and goes, duh.
Right.
And they're not even, they just understand attention.
They can be so smart without having any training.
Exactly.
I love this one, and similar situation where I had somebody come into a rehearsal and the music we were playing was really uplifting and upbeat. And this person came in and was like, they all look so angry. And it was all the kids, like from what they thought it was supposed to be, were just mean mugging so hard, And it was just like that drumline vibe. But to like someone else from the outside who's just trying to eat that bite of food, they're like, do you know how much salt is on this? Like,
well, it's such a big disconnect.
Right.
When the audio visual disconnect is so palpable that the layman can be like, this does not look like what I hear, right? And to me, that's like the lowest of hanging fruits for our activity, because we are an audio visual activity. And if you can't tell your performers to emote what they're hearing or like figure that out, and I get they're young, you got to train them how to feel in certain positions, right? And then what they're hearing and stuff in the show. But like, if your only go-to is just angry, everything is angry because it's the easiest thing to do,
right?
Then you have situations like that where the layman comes in and is just like, this doesn't fit.
Sure.
It doesn't feel snug in a rug. And that's a lot of times the problem.
Doesn't mean there can't be intense shows that would match with, but when it's like, you want to be an expressive performer of the vehicle you've got.
That's a hard one.
But yeah, no, that's one a layman can pick out. I'll never forget, I don't even know what the lesson is from this, but how many times my mom, Lisa, she's still with us. Just saying.
Stop!
But how many indoor drumline shows she was at?
I met Lisa, by the way.
Oh, yeah, she did. She came to the office.
That's
exactly right.
Nice lady.
Yeah. But how many indoor drumline shows she'd be at? And, she was watching me in this open group, and like the shows, obviously we took some chances. You had some hits, some misses on design, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But like, we're giving it all on. We were pretty good. Certainly. We medaled in open one of those years.
But she called you out.
Oh, yeah. But at the end, I'd be like, how'd we do? And what'd you like watching all the groups? And she'd always be like, gosh, that one group, they did the Barnyard Show, Farmer in the Dell, favorite group. And I was just like, man, you don't like our Vampires show? You don't like our whatever we're doing? Like,
we have seen shows in the past, they've got the cool trick, they've got a cool prop, they've got cool music that everybody's attracted to. But, in all my, highbrowedness that I had at one point in my life, we're thinking that drumline has to be done a certain way.
Yeah.
You run across a group that's got a dandelion running across the floor, and you think, wow, there's space for this too, And I think that's great. I think that's awesome. And what that did, it humbled me a lot, to be honest with you. And because I realized that we aren't as fun as we think we are. But yeah, I thought it was unique, and I thought they brought their level of to
fan favorite. Still talking about it a decade later.
I am.
Right?
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's those things that you can do in a show that, me, Ma, Papa, Cousin Timmy, Aunt Lucille, they all like, hey, I remember that. That's really cool. Did that group play better than some other groups? I don't know. I don't think so. But their show was cooler than some other people, and that's what got them in finals probably, and because they were playing just as good as probably the people around them.
Right.
They needed that extra and that did that for them. I think it was really cool. But what is that for your group? Asking the public, like, what is that because everybody's expected to march and play and drum and
Drumming loud, everyone's going to do that.
Yeah,
everyone's going to play
it's just
loud.
like
everyone's going to play a bunch of shots.
You also have to put yourself in the position of the audience and the judges that are watching group after group after group after group. Just because something might be unique to you because you're new to the activity doesn't mean that it's like not a trend right now and they're going to be saturated with it.
Sure.
In this 2 or 3 year time frame, right? Yeah. So what are you going to do to notice the trend and then to zig when everybody else is zagging?
Right. And if you're, I mean, obviously the independent world, all the world-class groups are like, they've got design teams coming up with brand new show ideas, custom and all that. But for the vast majority of us who are all out there doing this in A class, open class, regional A, novice, right? You're going to buy a show and you already get regional exclusivity, right? We already talked about that, how no one else in your same circuit can do the same exact music. But then everyone's going to come out with a rectangular tarp, and the same instruments as each other pretty much, right? So then with that being on the table, what are you going to do that's going to stick in the judge's mind, that's going to come across as really genuine, really unique, really sticky, and move people's blood pressure? And I can tell you right now, playing loud isn't the only way to do that, right?
Oh, yeah.
But sometimes getting people to lean forward, and that's where there is a little bit of... you got to read the tea leaves a little bit and shoot your shot because you can't control what all the other people in your circuit, in your class are going to do. You have no control over that.
No, and the thing, I think, talking about effect in the end, the hardest thing to understand is not every effect deserves an applause. Sometimes silence is appreciation also.
Yep.
Like, I just appreciate what you did. I get it. Maybe I'm taking a few seconds to digest the intellectual part of what just happened or the coordination of color and visual, whatever it is. Maybe there's a lot to digest that maybe means something bigger than an applause, you know? And sometimes I wish people would realize that like, oh, that group didn't get a lot of applause. It's like, maybe that's not their goal. Maybe their goal is to tell you something.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Who knows? So, but that's something that every group has to deal with and accept, because if you are one of those groups that's not looking for applause, your performers better know that. Because if they're like searching for that applause to keep them going throughout the show, they won't be there, right? And I think that's important to communicate that to the members, like, hey, we're going for a different effect this year. We're going for this intellectual, emotional effect that's not going to get people on their seats until the end of the show.
We want to give people the chills.
Yeah,
we want
to, so it's, I think maybe that's part of the discussion. We talk about communicating to people is like, what type of effect are we trying to get across? Like, what message are we trying to say? What new color combination are we trying to bring out?
Yep.
And
that's, you mentioned earlier, it doesn't just take a world-class program for the kids to buy in or not to like what you're cooking. Even at the lower level, be able to tell them what makes this great. Because if you can tell them what makes this great and what we're all gonna like, we're shooting for this, we're all gonna get it together. It's gonna take a lot of hard work and it's gonna pay off. But you got to name it, right? What are we trying to do? Mm-hmm. I love bringing that back. Even at Mystique in snare line sectionals, I try to make a regular habit of referencing. Now, when I listen to the MP3 of the full ensemble music, this is what's happening. This is what the last 30 seconds brought us to this moment, and this is what we have to deliver. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, you're just in the room with a Met beeping and some black and white on the page, and it's just lifeless anyway. So, producing moments,
as far as communicating go, I'm going to go back to one of the things we we're talking about earlier is like when you're communicating to the staff and members, if you are the staff. So if I'm a designer and I'm talking to the staff, I want to communicate what that effect is supposed to be, what the intent is supposed to be. Hey, we're supposed to be focusing on this. Let's make sure we produce it a certain way so that, the arrival of the idea gets the reaction that we want, whether it is somebody, contemplating and digesting the idea or a visceral applause, a reaction, I think all that stuff is good to communicate up front, just to make sure the expectations are clear, because you definitely don't want to not tell the members that, and they go do the first show and they're like, dude, nobody clapped for us. And as a designer, you're like, yeah, wasn't it great? And they're like, and they were, it'd be great for them if they were expecting that, but they weren't expecting that, So I think just that part of it being clear, because that can really change your entire mindset if you know what the expectation is, and because, we all experience like kids are getting real frustrated and they're like, man, this is hard. I can't do that. And you go, this is hard. This is what hard feels like. It's okay to feel frustrated and to feel like this is something difficult. Because sometimes we forget that sometimes what we do is the first time that student or performer might have experienced any kind of difficulty in life.
Sure.
Anything, and maybe things came easy to them except for drumming.
Yep.
And now they're having experienced that frustration, that emotion of not getting to where you want to be when the instructor's like, come on, I need you to do whatever. And you're, as a coach, they're trying to get you to do something and you shut down. Maybe you go the opposite way and you haven't really learned how to be like, yeah, I got you, coach. I'm coming to you. You know what I'm saying? Like there's some psychology that has to go into place there when you're talking about that kind of stuff up front.
Right. And I forget if it was Arnold Schwarzenegger or another. I love that documentary he had on Netflix.
Awesome.
That was so great. Yeah. But I forget if it was in that or another like bodybuilder documentary thing I saw. But somebody was saying about their own journey that they didn't even start to count reps for themselves until their muscles were burning. And that's when they would say the number 1. And I like to think about that for young students coming into rehearsal, because maybe like if it's like, hey, we're going to do buzz rolls and it's your first day, you're going to be out of chops so soon.
So soon.
And they might be looking at the older kids across and feel like a failure when in reality they should be thinking, sweet, I got to my improvement time already and I'm going to start improving now and getting stronger for real. Whereas they've got another 5 minutes to play before they can even start chopping out. You know what I mean? And like growing their skills. So that's what this all is, right? Is like putting yourself into that growth zone and pushing it and getting a little bit better every time.
Doing hard things with other people that like to do hard things.
Yeah.
And that's how you find your tribe. That's it.
That's band, people.
That is it.
Get on in here.
That is it. So, and with that, we're going to be in today's podcast, and we thank you for coming out and listening to all the fun stuff we got to say about band. So, end zone to end zone, baby. Here we are.
See you next time.